Hello and welcome to another TLDR Brexit Explains video. In this one, we're going to be taking a look at the internal market bill that was published yesterday and why it's so problematic. We first discussed this bill earlier this week regarding the potential it has to overwrite the withdrawal agreement and really damage UK-EU negotiations. Since then though, the actual bill has been published, so let's replace the rumours with the bill itself and discuss what this controversial bill means for Brexit and the unity of the United Kingdom. If you didn't already know, we make a series called The Daily Briefing. Every day, we put together a 4-minute briefing summarising the news stories you might not have understood or even seen. You can read the briefing every day by subscribing to the newsletter. If you prefer, you can listen by searching for TLDR News in your favourite podcast app. Finally, you can watch sections of our briefing on TikTok or on our YouTube and Instagram stories. Links to all of those can be found in the description. So all of this controversy starts with the Internal Market Bill, a bill being proposed by Johnson's government supposedly to allow goods to be freely traded between the four nations of the United Kingdom post-Brexit. Now, we'll explain some of the contents of the bill in a moment, but for now, the contents are not super important. So to start off with, as we discussed in our video on Tuesday, the Internal Market Bill tries to essentially overwrite parts of Johnson's withdrawal agreement. That deal that the UK and EU were so proud of in December is already being overwritten by the UK. Saying it like that though makes it seem so casual, like changing your mind on an ASOS order. But overwriting an international agreement is obviously not ideal. I mean, it's even a violation of international law. And actually, it also sort of contradicts domestic law too. Usually, new domestic laws simply override the old ones, according to a legal principle called implied repeal. However, when the withdrawal agreement was implemented into UK domestic law in January, in the form of the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Act, it contains Section 7A, which, according to lawyers, basically gives the Withdrawal Agreement Act priority over all other domestic laws. So, while laws normally overwrite each other, it's simply not possible for Britain to overwrite and ignore the withdrawal agreement on this occasion. So, to get around it, the bill says that UK ministers have the power to disapply export declarations, and that the Minister for Northern Ireland has the power to interpret, or if need be, disapply Article 10 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, both of which are contradictory with the withdrawal agreement. And then it just says, notwithstanding inconsistency or incompatibility with relevant international or other domestic law, where international or other domestic law is defined to include basically anything. This means that the Internal Market Bill takes precedence over even the Withdrawal Agreement Act in domestic law. And it's about the most brazen way of saying, yeah, we're breaking international law. Something we already knew because the government's own Northern Ireland minister actually admitted it in the House of Commons on Tuesday.
I would say to my honourable friend that yes, this does break international law in a very specific and limited way.
The problem here goes beyond the legality of the issue though. It seems even the government will admit that it breaks international law. No, the bigger issue is what this means for the UK in this negotiation and others. As Theresa May commented in the Commons, this could fundamentally impact the UK's credibility.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom government signed the withdrawal agreement with the Northern Ireland Protocol. This Parliament voted that withdrawal agreement into UK legislation. The government is now changing the operation of that agreement. Given that, how can the government reassure future international partners that the UK can be trusted to abide by the legal obligations of the agreements it signs?
May is certainly not wrong here, with the move impacting this negotiation with the EU and the UK's status more generally. Anyway, this was all such a muddle that the head of the UK government's legal department, Jonathan Jones, has quit over it, marking the 6th senior civil servant to do so this year. So that's perhaps the most obvious problem with the Internal Market Bill. It violates international law by unilaterally rewriting certain parts of the withdrawal agreement. Before we move on to the other, perhaps equally big issue, it's worth noting that in Tuesday's video, we go into more detail about the bill itself and why it contradicts with the withdrawal agreement. Click the link in the description if you're looking for that kind of detail. So what's the second major issue that goes beyond the fact the bill is illegal and hurts Britain's standing in negotiations? Well, it also violates the Sewell Convention. Now, this might sound like some niche, antiquated part of the UK's constitution, and it sort of is, but it's still definitely worth talking about. The Sewell Convention basically prevents the British Parliament in Westminster from legislating on matters which affect the devolved assemblies without their express consent. Now, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill is basically all about guaranteeing frictionless trade within the UK post-Brexit, which it achieves by basically forcing Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to follow whatever standards and regulations Westminster wants them to, using the mutual recognition principle and non-discrimination principle, which basically just says that if something complies with the regulations in one part of the UK, it can be sold in any part of the UK. Obviously, because the Internal Market Bill is a piece of parliamentary legislation, it doesn't need the approval of any of the devolved assemblies. It just needs a majority of Conservative MPs to force it through. And this is why it's a violation of the Sewell Convention. The government is also breaking a promise they made in 2017 by doing this. That's because in 2017, the government and devolved assemblies realised that once the UK had left the EU, powers over agriculture, fisheries, food standards and environmental policies would all default to the devolved assemblies. That meant that if Scotland decided that they were not going to allow chlorinated chicken, but England was fine with it, then there could be some sort of border checks between Scotland and England. This obviously is not an ideal state of affairs, not just because it means border infrastructure, but also because it makes trade deals far more difficult. So, to try and avoid this, Theresa May's government started trying to agree on so-called common frameworks between the devolved assemblies and Parliament. These common frameworks were supposed to be mutually agreed by all four assemblies, and this process of consensus building would allow them to avoid breaking the Sewell Convention. So, when the Internal Market Bill white paper came out in August, and the devolved assemblies realised the government's plan, they were more than a bit annoyed. Obviously, the pro-independence SNP weren't happy, but the Welsh government, that is Labour and pro-union, were also more than a bit upset. The SNP described it as an outrageous power grab, and the Welsh Brexit Minister, Jeremy Miles, sent a letter to Alok Sharma that described the bill as a direct attack on the current model of devolution, unnecessary, unworkable and heavy-handed, as well as claiming that it would accelerate the breakup of the union. And this is exactly why the Internal Market Bill's violation of the Sewell Convention is such an issue, because it provides more fuel for pro-independence movements like the SNP. We recently did a video on why Scottish independence is looking more likely than ever, and breaking promises and trying to limit devolved assemblies' power without their consent is only going to make the breakup more likely, which the government claims they don't want. In fact, support for Scottish independence has gone from 45% in 2018 to 48% in 2019 to 54% today. It's completely mad that the current Conservative government think that this Internal Market Bill is a good idea, when support for independence is already as high as it is. And Jeremy Miles wasn't scaremongering when he implied that Wales could leave the Union as well. Support for Welsh independence has for a long time remained steady at about 18%. But a YouGov poll in June found that it had bounced to 25%, and a second YouGov poll conducted in August found that it had reached 32%. Also, previous polling showed that the Welsh are more likely to support independence if Scotland goes independent first, and even more likely to do so if they're able to join the EU after leaving. A 2016 poll found that support jumped from 19 to 24% if Scotland were independent, and even higher to 35% if Wales were to become a member of the EU post-leaving. So, doing some back-of-the-napkins calculations, if an independent Scotland makes support for Welsh independence jump by a factor of 1.25 as it did in the 2016 poll, that would mean that an independent Scotland, which looks increasingly likely, would result in 40% support for Welsh independence, which takes Welsh independence from basically the Lib Dems level of support to Labour levels of support. Furthermore, if the prospect of EU membership makes independence jump by a factor of 1.8, as it did in 2016, then if Scotland were to demonstrate that a British country could go independent and then join the EU, then you'd expect support for Welsh independence to reach 57%. Now, these back-of-the-napkin calculations should be taken with a massive pinch of salt. The methodology of just using two polls done 4 years apart and then combining them together in the way we've just done is obviously less than perfect. But the point is that Welsh independence is no longer a fringe movement, and independent of whether Scotland goes independent, support has just jumped by more than 10% over the last year. Anyway, like this video and comment down below if you'd like us to do a full video on Welsh independence. Regardless, that's the other huge problem with the Internal Market Bill. It makes independence across the UK much more likely, as well as, well, breaking international laws. But in maybe some optimistic news, there's at least a decent chance that the House of Lords won't let this through anyway. Let us know what you think of the whole situation in the comments below. And as always, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers, who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name listed at the end of the videos, just like Divya Khanna, Simon Barnaco, and Aaron Adragona, then be sure to back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.